correspond to a color. Try to understand why these piano notes are blue, white, purple. Try to use what you are seeing at the moment, aid what you are hearing. For this moment, your vision is not independent from your hearing, they are going together. So enjoy the moment. Enjoy the chance of having two of your senses correspond virtually. Try to follow the violin and see why it is red. Try to understand its redness and how it spreads around, along with the voice. This is the artist's interpretation of the sounds made into the visuals. It might be interesting to continue watching this and understand how each note is made into a visual. But there are a few people who do not need these visual cues to understand what color a sound is, or its texture, or its position. One might be irritated to step into a room with bright red walls, simply because it is irritating. But there are a few people who would find it really irritating, disturbing, because the walls are too loud or the walls are too spicy. This phenomenon of one experience as sensory or a cognitive pathway triggering another, this is called synesthesia, the unity of senses. Synesthetes, who are considered lucky by some and diagnosed patients by others, find it quite normal, natural, that Mondays would be dark blue or the letter K might taste like bitter chocolate. So, how does it work? When babies are born, the sensory center in their brain has not fully specialized yet. This is a process that starts in the womb around 14th week of pregnancy, and this can last up to 2 years. After birth, this model unity causes babies to not to be able to differentiate easily between similar objects and give one attribute to another. So here is an apple. When the baby sees this apple, he automatically starts to examine it. It is red, it is round. Baby crawls to the apple, takes one, and smells it, tastes it, and collects all of these sensory inputs into one package and names it apple. The next day, baby sees another object. It's a red ball. He sees that it is round, he sees that it is red, and he automatically labels it. It is supposed to smell so, it's supposed to taste so. But when the baby crawls and tries to bite it, he sees that that's not the case. At that moment, the baby understands that some of the sensory inputs should have been split into categories. So and so, by experiencing the world, the baby learns to prune the neurons and categorize the inputs into different categories that we call senses, into smell, into taste, into color. And some people actually fail while doing so. And they are called the synesthetes. So, natural synesthesia is caused by retaining the cross-modal connections in the brain. Different researchers point to different statistics, from 1 in 20 to 1 in 20,000. There are synesthetes around the world, and most of them haven't discovered that they are different in some way. For me, I knew that each note had a specific color. These were always dark blue, E's were bright red, A's were saffron yellow. And I haven't ever found it worthy enough to discuss, because, everybody would know that these would be dark blue, right? I saw that this was not the case around 4th grade. We had an assignment. We were supposed to paint the music. The teacher was playing the Chinese dance of Tchaikovsky from the Nutcracker. And I took it really seriously. This is what I came up. The people in the class were drawing dinosaurs. They were drawing happy families and other irrelevant things, random things. I was annoyed by it slightly because no one was actually following the assignment. I took it really seriously because the flute parties, the chimes, all of them had very specific colors. It wasn't possible to interpret this in another way for me. And this is what I drew. I have to mention that there are many other types of synesthesia as well. And usually if one has one, the others just come along. One of the most basic sensory synesthesia examples is grapheme to color. These people automatically assume a color to every symbol or letter they see. A's would be red, for example, in any script that they are reading, regardless of the font, the size, the place, or the original color, one could say. Most synesthetes wouldn't actually be able to discern the original color of a given text if they have this ability. Another one would be, in my case, color, sound to color. This is the piano of Stravinsky and how he would interpret notes. There are different ways. One could name each tone, each interval, each degree, or the timbre of a sound into a color. One can taste syllables, one can feel numbers touching the body. Some examples of synesthesia would even be related to personifications. such as one could find number 2, a young blue guy who doesn't do his homework at all, and his older sister, number 3, is green, and she's actually quite angry at him. There are concrete ways to identify true synesthetes. It is sometimes easy to forge the association. Yes, Mondays could be blue, but this is not the case for a true synesthete. Mondays would be blue already, because it is. It has to be consistent, involuntary, automatic, and memorable. An electric blue voice is always an electric blue voice. Not that it resembles, not that it makes the connection all the time, but because it is, basically. Forcing to think of something or having the option of not experiencing it does not take place. There are some tests to find out if someone's a true synesthete or not. So, if you cannot understand automatically how many of these figures are different, in 3 seconds you are basically not a grapheme to color synesthete. This is how one of them would perceive this picture. So, do sounds have some specific colors that only a few can see? Should an E flat be always purple? This is completely untrue, that's not the case. A synesthete's perception is personal, it's only in his own world, and it's highly debatable. For example, my brother wouldn't agree with me that A's would be saffron yellow. However, it's still interesting in some ways that there are some common grounds that most synesthetes agree on somehow. For example, most synesthetes find the sound C red. From Isaac Newton to Chopin, most artists and thinkers have noted this, for example. People ask, what does it change? I don't know. It's not different for me because I have only experienced one way of perceiving the reality. It doesn't block my view. It's just the sound has one more attribute that goes with it. It sometimes distracts me, or I might find it overwhelming, but if I'm finding a sound overwhelming because it's too red, someone else might just comment that it's too loud, for example. I remember I was standing right here 3 years ago with my saxophone. I was about to play take 5, and it's E flat minor. It's supposed to be purple. I know that it will be purple. And there goes this bright orange spotlight, and I suddenly start to think of another key, F sharp major. Why? Because that one's the orange. So I start off in a completely different key, I lose track, I try to come back, the beginning ends up as a disaster, I handle it somehow. But there are benefits to this as well. For example, most synesthetes would agree that it helps memory, because it has one more attribute. I would not easily forget the piece that I play, for example. So, having mentioned that babies possess synesthesia to some extent, I would like to go on to follow some traces of synesthesia in civilization. Language is one of the most vital tools of civilization, and it exhibits many synesthetic characteristics actually. If we think of it, for example, of some metaphors that could be considered synesthesia. For example, a prickly laughter or a bitter wind. One might easily understand how a bitter wind would be, but a wind doesn't naturally be bitter. That's an attribute that we could associate. It's a forged association, but as humans we can grasp this. Language doesn't only exhibit synesthesia through metaphors, but just as itself it has many other properties. Let's think of the writing systems. Somehow they have developed, we have these sounds, and mankind has decided to agree altogether that these sounds are corresponding to these figures. There's a common test called the Kiki and Booba test. Here are 2 pictures. If I ask you to name one of them Kiki and the other Booba, which one would you go with? How many of you would think that this one would be named Kiki? Please raise your hands. It's about everyone. There are always a few exceptions, but interestingly, 98% of the world agrees on this. Why? One might automatically argue, yes, because K has sharp edges, that's the reason why we would call the one with the sharp edges Kiki. But that's actually untrue. Speakers of other writing systems, such as Arabic or Chinese, or illiterate people also agree on this. The real reason why K has developed these sharp edges is that somehow the sound K is sharp. And that's how writing systems evolved. If you look at this concept from another perspective, of language being synesthetic, it's just the mere concept of language is. For example, I have an object, an apple, and I decide to call it something. There's an object, an idea, and it has a sound that automatically corresponds. It's interesting. According to some theories at the early stages of human evolution, after eating some of the mushrooms that have psychedelic effects, which are known to induce synesthesia, some believe that men have started to develop some specific speech patterns, which eventually evolved into language. This is interesting, because the same happens for babies. at young ages, language acquisition is fastest, and those are actually the times where synesthesia is natural. So, one can say that the language as a concept is synesthetic, and when one is experiencing synesthesia, it's much easier to learn. So, we said that synesthesia is an unconscious process. It is automatic, it's a response. But if we can use associations, conscious forced associations, from one sense to another, this would actually improve our daily lives a lot. Let's think, we actually do this all the time unintentionally. So, you go to your grandmother's, you are around 4 years old, and she bakes you this tasty, delicious cinnamon cake. You smell it, you take a bite, you like it, and 2 years later you go again, you know that she will prepare that cake for you, she bakes it again, and eventually, when you're out in the street and when you smell cinnamon, this automatically reminds you of your grandmother. Let's take it to a different step. Every time you're eating that cake, you are listening to the Pastoral Symphony of Beethoven, F major. You start to forge an association that the taste of cinnamon, or the smell of cinnamon, somehow corresponds to the sound. By doing so and so, you have already, it is natural, and all of us could understand that a smell could remind someone of a person. That is actually a synesthetic approach. If you can channel this, and if you can use this to forge connections, this would change our daily lives. For example, people who are suffering from amnesia might learn this method to help establish stronger memory, because smell and taste are much more efficient in memory if we compare it to other senses. Children with learning disabilities, or actually everyone would benefit from this. For example, if you are learning musical notation in the beginning along with color, and some actually do, this is much more efficient, it helps them remember. In general, it would enhance perception, it would enhance creativity for everyone, and you can actually create tangible rememberers on purpose. You can capture a moment in a smell or a sound, and then remember it every time you want to. It is, after all, in general, an alternative way of perceiving reality, one could say. We know that we can base our reality only on what we perceive, and the reality of a colorblind, a newborn baby, a completely blind person, a synesthete, all of them are looking at an apple, but what they perceive is different. How could it be the same? We do not get to pick the reality we live in, but we should still continue to question the neutrality or the objectivity of the world, of the common reality, if it exists. So, what is your reality? Thank you.